So the Alexander technique was developed in the late 1800s, really around 1892 to 1894, by an actor in Australia named Frederick Matthias Alexander. He was on stage reciting, and he'd feel hoarseness in his voice, and sometimes it would completely give out. So he went to doctors, and they suggested that he rest his voice, that would do the trick. So he'd rest his voice, say 2 weeks, would hardly speak, and he'd go back out on stage, and halfway through he'd feel the familiar hoarseness, and then he'd lose his voice again. So he decided it must be something he was doing when he was on stage reciting that was creating the loss of his voice. So he did have one clue. He had friends who told him they could hear him gasping for breath when he was reciting. So Alexander sat down and he set up mirrors, like a triptych of mirrors. So if you ever go to a tailor, you can look in one mirror and just see all around you and see what you're doing. So he noticed that when he began to speak, he was shortening his neck, pulling his head back, pulling down on his neck, tightening in his throat, bracing in his ribs, shortening his spine, pulling his legs and his arms into his torso. In short, he was compressing, constricting himself. So these patterns were subtle. It took a while for him to see them. So he lost his voice in the fall of 1892, and FM was able to return to the stage in the spring of 1994. He knew enough about vocal production to know that compression while you're trying to make sound will not make the sound you want to make. So FM was speaking in large halls. There was no PA system. Often these halls were filled with rowdy tin miners who wanted to be able to project his voice to the back of the hall. And in attempting to do that, he exaggerated some of his habitual patterns that he had in the rest of his life. This caused his hoarseness. So when we do some rigorous activity, our habits become much more pronounced, more exacerbated. But these habits are going on all the time. So you can watch a person walk and you can see some unnecessary compression, tightening, and pulling down. But all these tendencies become much more exaggerated when the person breaks into a run. So what FM Alexander noticed about himself in the context of being a reciter is applicable to us in all of our everyday activities. So FM Alexander discovered a way that was helpful not only for breathing, but for everything we do. He figured out how to stop doing the things that we do that get in our way. We call this inhibition. It's a neuromuscular term in Alexander technique. It's not a Freudian term. It's where you say to yourself, I'm not going to do the thing that harms me. I'm going to choose something that is better for me.